Kia ora, talo falava, and greetings. My name is Yuki Kihara, an interdisciplinary artist representing Aotearoa New Zealand at this year's 59th Venice Biennale. I'm currently here in Tamaki Makaurau, Auckland, in Aotearoa New Zealand, and I would like to take this opportunity to acknowledge Māori as the indigenous peoples of this country, Aotearoa New Zealand. The word Talanoa is a pan-Pacific word used to describe a process of open and transparent dialogue. Using the Talanoa as a metaphor, I have organized the Talanoa Forum to help extend the themes of Paradise Camp into a series of critical Talanoas presented online and in person, recently held in Venice and the Netherlands. You can find out more about the Talanoa Forum on www.talanoaforum.ws. Today, we present the last and final event for the Talanoa Forum, which is a Talanoa amongst the members of the First Solidarity Network, an informal network of national pavilions comprising of artists who are first-time representative from a marginalized or underrepresented group in their respective country, or first-time country participant in the Venice Biennale, which provided visitors to Venice a route to discover these firsts at the global world art event. For artists and curators, the network offers a practical advice and camaraderie among the participating pavilions. On establishing the First Solidarity Network, I wanted to use Venice Biennale as an opportunity to reach out to other artists and curators who are also first in the context of their own country. My hope is to encourage discourse around equitable representation of artists in their respective countries, as well as allowing pavilions to get a chance to know each other or get to know one another and to show support. In the first Biennale since the COVID pandemic, I believe that it's important for us to learn and listen to one another, to seek out new voices and perspectives on the world we live in through art. The First Solidarity Network includes the national pavilions of Albania, Great Britain, Poland, Nepal, Aotearoa New Zealand, and Singapore. We first gathered at Ocean Space in Venice a week before Vernissage after several Zooms in leading up to our arrival in Venice, and continue to connect in a variety of ways in order to foster long-lasting relationships. I'll now hand it over to Natalie King, the curator of the Aotearoa New Zealand Pavilion, who will be moderating our Talanoa this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Yuki, for your warm and generous introduction. My name is Natalie King. I'm based in Naarm, Melbourne, on Boonwurrung country, and I pay my respects to all First Peoples, their ancestors and elders past, present and emerging, and welcome all Aboriginal people who might be joining our finale Talanoa. We are all heading into the final 2 weeks of the Venice Biennale. It's frenetic for some of us, dismantling our exhibitions, preparing acquittals, audience numbers are swelling, and also we have a moment to ponder and reflect on the Venice Biennale juggernaut, which is both exhilarating and unremitting. When I curated Tracy Moffat's Australian Pavilion in 2017 in the Giardini, I was struck by the disconnect between the pavilions, and it seemed to me that pavilions were working in these sort of competitive silos of non-disclosure. So I was thrilled when Yuki suggested forming an alliance across pavilions so that we could share information and hang out during install period, laugh, be concerned, share our the trials and tribulations of what it means to participate in the Venice Biennale. We have an illustrious lineup of speakers for our Talanoa, and we have devised a kind of experimental format whereby the first person interviews the second, who interviews the third, and so on. This means that each participant is both interviewer and interviewee, and it hopefully collapses the the protocols of formatted presentations and break down the hierarchies of moderator and speakers. We hope that this kind of relay will be fast-paced and be a repartee between our speakers, and also reveal what has actually gone on in the process of being artist and curator for the national pavilions at the Venice Biennale. Many of us are aware that this 59th Venice Biennale marks an epochal shift in attitudes. For the very first time, there are many more women than men everywhere, from the Giardini to the Arsenale, and specifically in Cecilia Alemani's exhibition, The Milk of Dreams. There's strong representation of First Peoples and some non-binary artists. Hopefully we can collectively reflect on these long overdue shifts. So I'm going to hand over to Yuki, who's going to start off the first interview. And if each person, when they answer, could introduce themselves and also give a brief outline as to how they were appointed by their country. Over to you, Yuki.
Thank you very much, Natalie, for that wonderful welcome and introduction. So Emma, well done and congratulations on the British Pavilion with the Golden Lion. I was really happy for you and Sonia, when I was at the award ceremony. I actually visited the British Pavilion several times, actually, hoping that there was going to be less queues, but that was like pretty impossible. But whenever I managed to go and see the exhibition, again, there was so many people there. I wish I had the whole pavilion to myself, but obviously that's really impossible. But what I found most touching is when I actually went around to the back, where there were displays of CDs and cassette tapes of like these neo-soul music, which is something that I also grew up listening to. So I thought that was the most touching part of the exhibition, because it was something that I could relate to, that I was familiar with that music growing up. Beyond the hoopla of the media and all the chaos of the people visiting the pavilion. So yeah, I guess my question to you is that, how do you, what has been the criticism and the reception of the British Pavilion, and how do you keep yourself centered during the Venice Biennale? Because I believe you've also been working with the presentation of Anish Kapoor at Academia.
Thank you so much, Yuki, and it's fantastic to be here with everyone today. So where to start with all that? I'll start, as Natalie requested, saying a little about the appointment, because every curator and artist relationship is distinct and unique, both for that project, but also the artist has a practice that's publicly known, and a curator also has a practice, usually that's actually hidden from view far more, but it's often quite distinctive in its own right. And unusually for the British Pavilion as well, they did the appointment of the artist first. The artist was appointed through a number of art world numeraries, not an easy word, selecting and deciding a shortlist over a long period of time. And they felt it was best, the director of the British Council, who was the commissioner, felt it was best that, as Sonia Boyce had been selected, that it should be the artist would be involved in the selection of the curator. So there was a large open call, which the British Council had not done before, a big international call for anyone who was a British citizen and a curator could apply for that. And they shortlisted down to 10. And I was appointed, which was a delight. Sonia had previously seen a number of my exhibitions, as had some of the others on the panel, and so was aware that over a number of years I had platformed for the first time with solo shows 2 of the major artists from the Black Arts movement, women that Sonia had been close to in the 80s, so had come to my own understanding through learning from them and with them about the different context of that specific group and the specific forms of practice that Sonia's work was born from. And also I have a very experimental form of practice that's quite open-ended, quite a lot of experiential learning projects as well as exhibitions, and very much just following my sort of values and interests, particularly in political freedoms for individuals and optimism, and how that can manifest in how we learn from and with each other through making exhibitions and projects. And that resonated with Sonia's practice too. So we started working together, having never worked together before, and Sonia had the sort of spark of an idea. And from there, it was very much a collaboration as to how to bring that into being. So for people who aren't familiar with the project, the final manifestation is that it's 4 singers who are brought together to improvise, and specifically it's singers who are women who don't normally improvise or collaborate in that way experimentally, and who are, under Sonia's definition, Black British in their connection to each other as music makers. And so the space that Yuki was referring to is at the back of the pavilion. There's a kind of smaller room, and in that room there is lots of different memorabilia, really, records and photos and posters from different musicians from the from Black female artists, which is part of Sonia's devotional collection, which is a really unruly collection because of how she draws it together in different ways. And it's displayed in a cheerful, quite messy, quite comic, joyous way. The emotionality of women's voices was something that we were really keen to have very strongly throughout the pavilion. And just as Yuki said, as she was looking at that space that has the different memorabilia in it, there's, for most people, a huge amount of people, there's something that sparks a memory recall to something that was emotionally meaningful to you. And the very first thing that Sonia and I had decided on our first meeting to work together was we wanted to create an exhibition that made people feel excited and kind of uplifted, because it's been such a challenging time. So whilst the political articulation of the exhibition is quite precise and playful, the importance of it being Black British women is under a definition that it doesn't take from the American definition, which is more familiar to a lot of people. But instead, as Sonia would say, it's an historically British understanding, and it's an umbrella term, use of Black, that gained traction very much in the 80s and somewhat before that as well through unions. And it's a collective voice amongst African, South African and Caribbean diasporic cultural and political activists. And it's a term that recognises the impact of Britain's colonial and imperial past, and that experience of racialisation and discrimination happens for people from many different backgrounds. There's been points historically, it's also included Irish people within that definition of Black. So it's quite particular to the UK. And Sonia's work is kind of born from those experiences. But that combination of playful and political and emotive through music is very characteristic of Sonia's work.
That's great. And then, so are you able to talk about your involvement in Anish Kapoor's exhibition in academia?
Yeah, so with the niche, actually, it's that we did an exhibition together in Oxford. So the book launched at the academia of his painting work. So often when I work with artists, so I didn't curate his exhibition in Venice, but did curate a project in last autumn with him in Oxford, and showing a practice which isn't the practice that's usually recognisable as Anish Kapoor, which is very polished and very intellectual in its conceptualism. And instead, this work is much more visceral and expressive, and it's painting. And some of the things he didn't want me to include in the articulation interpretation, but that I found fascinating and think there's lots of traction for, is huge amounts of it is drawing on ideas of Shakti and ideas of creative female sacred energy that is of the earth and the world and the cosmos. And here's this fascination with what it is to bring something into creation. So these works are messier and rawer and come from quite a different place. So very different projects, exceedingly different artists to work with. But Anish is very much trying and working on how to unlearn that kind of perfectionist, conceptually cool, intellectual approach that his work is best known for, and instead do something that stretches him way out of his comfort zone and what he's known for as well. So I think if there's anything in common with the two practices, it's that how does one sit in that place of uncertainty and creativity, which Sonia and I are both very comfortable in, that dwelling in that place and trusting that the creative process will get you there. And if you're kind of spotting things and have a conscientiousness to really rigorously doing a deep dive on the artist's practice, so we can kind of move around in many different directions as the work unfolds and develops, but to kind of keep that thread kind of through it as well, with how the final work manifests and is articulated. So I think people's reactions, to go back to your question, Yuki, as well, about people's responses to the British Pavilion. We were delighted, but had not been thinking about the awards. So it was so surprising in a delightful way when they called our names at the awards ceremony. It was only when they said Gran Bretagna and called out our names individually to receive the award. And as we realized that might happen, but that was only about 30 seconds before it was announced, we looked at each other and Sonia said, "You're going to have to make a speech." And I said, "Sonia, you're going to have to make a speech. It's a project about British Black women's voices, you know, this kind of," and there was this trepidation, and Sonia sort of stayed sitting for quite a while. And I had to, in that way one does, working together on a project, lovingly encourage her to kind of move forward. And it was very emotional because it had been so not something that we'd anticipated. The project was experimental, creative, and joyous, but with an edge, and trying to present women in public space in a way that was complicated and glitchy and not perfect and quite raw. And we'd kind of just been getting on with it in an enjoyable state of semi-denial, I'd say. So that kind of the weight of the British Pavilion and the Venice Biennale as a whole was not something that we spent time particularly discussing. We were just doing the thing. So, and in terms of criticisms and such, I could imagine there's plenty, and I haven't looked too closely at such things, nor have I read lots of the reviews or other things either. I know that for some people, these things resonate exceedingly deeply, which is feedback I've heard from different people. And that's who you make the work for. It's the people who are going to find the terror in it, the joy in it. They're going to be open enough to be moved by and potentially even changed a little by the experience of what one's created. And I think it's probably shared amongst most of us.
Thanks for that. I still remember the acoustics in the exhibition. Because of the high ceiling, you know, the sound traveled really well. And I thought the use of the acoustics and the speakers were amazing.
It's been a joy to see the different pavilions, the Venice Biennale, and what a pleasure to get to speak to others as well. I've just learned huge amounts from everybody on here and the different practices. So it's my great pleasure to ask a few questions to Shubigi Rao. And she is both an artist and also a curator, as well as a writer. And quite beautifully, the presentation in Venice that she did with the brilliant, inspiring curator Uta Metabar is Pulp 3, Biography of the Banished Book. And it's got an exquisite fragility and strength to the whole presentation as you go into it, with this beautiful paper architecture and the precariousness of that, and the beautiful delicacy, but depth really of the way that the phylographic tree diagram kind of is a way to indicate a complexity and interrelationship of living content and ideas is present in the space, along with the actual physical books. And then you can find your way into the heart of it, and where some of the stories are told to you by people's voices rather than just words. So first, huge congratulations, Shubigi. It's a really beautiful presentation. This might be cutting to the chase too quick, but you've spoken interestingly on the kind of the violence that's inherent within the precarity and the endangered languages, that is something that you're raising awareness of through the work. Could you speak to some of that? And also that this is the culmination of a huge ongoing project that's 10 years in the making, 5 years with this project. Could you speak about that dedication and the commitment that you have to this too?
Thank you, Emma. First of all, congratulations again on the line. It's so well deserved. I think it was brilliant, the whole pavilion. And I mean, Yuki has also spoken really well about it. So I apologize for the poor light here. It's actually nighttime, and I just had to find a quiet corner because I'm in Kochi right now. So I just thank you again also for your very pithy and insightful description of the pavilion. It was actually very hard, to be honest, to imagine how this work would appear in Venice. I think that this hardest thing for me is always the massive amount of information and material that's there. I have a bookcase of hard drives of footage that I've shot over 5 years, and it's just hundreds of hours. And then to winnow through all of that and then make something coherent, knowing that Venice is sort of a place where people don't have very much time, they're potentially exhausted most of the time. I think that's that's something that I wanted to give every story that was included its due, and I didn't want sort of to race through some things, but this was this really strange balancing act that I needed to do. And that actually comes to this, how the selection happens. So in Singapore, they sort of invite, it's not like an open call, so they invite 5 artists and 5 curators. I think I may be getting the numbers wrong, and coincidentally Uta had been invited as the curator and I'd been invited as the artist, and we reached out to each other, and we realized we were both invited, so we decided to do a joint proposal. And that was quite a lovely little coincidence. But I think the other thing is, apart from our shared bibliophilia and our love of books, I mean, I don't actually valorize the book. I think it's only an example of format, but one worth fiercely defending. But I think it was great working with Uta because for 2 reasons. One, of course, is she's a curator with immense experience and knowledge and wisdom and humor also. And that's very essential, even though it doesn't seem apparent. There's a lot of humor also buried in the work. But the second reason is because I was chosen as Singapore's first female solo artist, but I'm a naturalized Singaporean. I wasn't born there, and I've only been there 20 years. And I think that I still have my Indian accent also, as you can tell. So for someone like me who doesn't believe in nation, especially colonial ideas of nationhood, and I mean, now, I mean, if you think about India and Singapore are both post-colonial nations, I think that there's the one sort of argues with its colonial past, and the other, like Singapore, embraces it and kind of whitewashes it in a way, saying thinks of it as benevolent. There are all these sort of undercurrents that are there. At the same time, the fact that I'm of Indian origin matters, because if I'm representing Singapore in that sense, it was deeply uncomfortable for me. So I have to also foreground that. But then I'm also used to being deeply uncomfortable about most things. So that's also okay, I suppose. The other thing that I found very sort of challenging initially, and I like to always mention what was difficult, because that's the first thing that doesn't get talked about, I find. The other challenging thing, apart from the amount of material, the fact that I was chosen by Singapore at this moment, was the fact that a lot of people trumpeted this, this first all-female artistic team, first solo women artist. And I just kept thinking, after 13 men, this is not something you should be boasting about. I don't think this is something we should be ashamed, frankly. So I sort of went off script during my opening as well. In front of the minister, I sort of looked at the speeches like, I'm not going to jump with this. I just said, I hope this is not a token thing. And I'm looking forward to the next 4 women who come after me. So I don't know how that went down. But I think it's important to recognize that there is this tendency towards, we've ticked the box, we've done the first, and now we can go back to the way things were. And that's also something that I challenge in the work I do. I'm very impatient with tokenism of any kind, but I'm also very impatient with appropriating ideas from people who've been marginalized and then centering it, which brings me to my role in the project. I film alone, and I travel alone, and it's always word of mouth. I discover people that way. Why I do that is simply because it's a very simple reason. Any ethical decisions that I face, I have to resolve alone. There is no diffused ethical responsibility. Frequently, well, not as frequently, sorry, not frequently, actually, often enough though, that it's an issue. People change their minds, because when I meet people, it's like I'm meeting a stranger, I'm a stranger to them. And I have about an hour or two for people to open up and tell me the stories. And some of these people have survived conflict, they've survived wars also. And books, and talking about books in libraries and cultural genocide is just a cover really for talking about the violence inherent in our species. The impulse to create and the warring impulse to destroy are so inextricably bound up together that you can't actually really separate them. There's no community that hasn't enacted some form of violence or silencing in some form. And it's a very horrible feeling to sit with. So anyway, long story short, when I do film people sometimes it's cathartic for them. I sometimes turn off the camera because the emotion is so loaded, and I don't think it's seemly to have it seen by other people. Also, people change their minds. And at that moment, I actually remove stories. I mean, it seems like the project's it's a pushback against censorship, but I have quite gleefully and quite without a second thought, when people have asked, I have actually expunged passages from the books. So even in the book in Venice, you'll see that there are passages that have been blacked out. And we were at the printers when somebody changed their mind, and I went ahead and did it anyway. And I was sitting with my team of people, and we all sat with black pens, and we out of all the copies, all 5,000 copies, we blacked out. This is a story most people don't know, passages that were on request. And I had no doubts about doing this. I knew it needed to be done, and I would do it in a heartbeat. I did it for the previous volume as well. For the film, it's harder because there's so many stories. It's a 90-minute long film. Big gamble to have a 90-minute long film in Venice. But I also edited it with my editor in such a way that if you come in even for 5 to 8 minutes, you'll immediately apprehend what the project is about and the heart of the project. And there's a reason the film is buried in the midst of that paper kind of maze. It's not really a maze, but in its innards, really. And the reason is because that's the core, the kernel of everything. And that's the people that have participated in this project, people I've worked with. And I think you need to make that little trek in. You have to be willing to walk through that paper and come in and be willing to sit down for at least 5 or 8 minutes. To my shock, a lot of people stayed longer. People watched the whole thing. People came back and to watch it again, which is overwhelming for me to imagine. I actually didn't think in a place like Venice, when there's just so much amazing work everywhere, that people would actually sit through the whole film. And that's why the book was meant to be taken away, so you can spend your time with it or abandon it in the hotel. It's up to you. If you're overweight, it's fine, it's okay. But the idea was that you should have time to sit with these things, because they aren't only my words. The book, my voice is more present, but in the film, apart from the editing, it's the voices of the people I've worked with, or the people that I've had the luck and privilege to encounter. There are a range of issues and themes that actually figure there. And I think that when you talk about violence, which is, by the way, thank you, you didn't cut to the chase at all. I think that's actually something that is very important. This entire project came out because of my very naive idealism that I've unfortunately retained from childhood, which is, why is our species so quick and easy to default to a violent reaction or a violent impulse? Why is it that when we encounter anything different or new, our reaction is to other it and find an attempt to suppress it, change it, destroy it, marginalize it? It's just something I've never comprehended. And as a child, this was something that made me a figure of fun, so to speak, because I couldn't understand sort of playground politics. I could understand why this was came so easily to most. I still don't, and so I find it very hard to participate in a lot of how do I say, in a lot of casual cruelty, really, and maybe perhaps not very many people recognize it as such. I find the art world is rife with that form of casual cruelty, where you can dismiss the work and labor of people very casually. We saw it happen also. I mean, I can't tell you how many male critics I encountered who were like, not one of them said Cecilia Alemani's exhibition is not for me. Almost all of them said this is the weakest we've seen, and I said, oh really? So it's an emotional reaction you're having then. Oh no, it's not an emotional reaction. I mean, it's just that too many women. And I said, you mean you are having an emotional reaction? You're reacting to the presence of a gender different to yours. I mean, it's amazing how they don't hear themselves or see themselves. But this is something that I think all of you must have probably encountered in some form. So it is a form of violence. It's the inability to listen to what you haven't heard before. It's an inability to listen to what hasn't you haven't encountered before. And I think it's impossible to do what I really want to do with this project. The full title is A Short Biography of the Banished Book, and it's short because it's only 10 years long. It's impossible to actually cover all the things I want to talk about in 10 years. Because I also speak about the futures of knowledge, the impossibility of, the dangers of neoliberal money and funding and politics that actually paywall all the world's knowledge. If you're from the so-called sort of global south or majority world, and you don't have institutional backing, you can't access the world's knowledge. It's all paywalled. So I mean, almost all the world's knowledge right now is controlled by 5 companies that are sitting in 3 countries, and all 3 countries are either in Europe or in the United States. So how is this different from the colonial control of resources, when we still have all the world's knowledge controlled by just a handful of elite people? And I think that's really, in a sense, one of the most egregious forms of violence that I've tried to speak about as well. Again, not enough place to do it in Venice, and perhaps I'm going on a bit much here, so I'll stop. But Emma, thank you for your question. Yeah, I'm glad you got to see the pavilion, and I hope you got a book as well, because there was, I think, a cap on how many books could go out a day, because we couldn't afford to print more. But if you didn't, it's available as a viewable PDF, I think, online as well. So yeah, thanks, Emma. I think that I have a question actually for Adela, and I think that I just wanted to mention that this was one of my favorite pavilions for a number of reasons. When you're the first woman, or one of the first, there's a tremendous burden of expectation. It's almost like you carry the weight of your entire gender. If you're the first First Nations person, you're carrying the weight of the expectation of having to represent your entire people. And I think that's a burden that's not actually foisted on what is what we've been used to, which is the default male and so on. And I think that what my impression of the Albanian Pavilion was that despite the historical weight of this, is despite the kind of histories of Albania that were also embedded in the incredible range of work there, I think that the curation was so adept that to me it felt like it was freed of that burden of history. And much as, I really do love histories, and I grew up during the Cold War as well. So I think this is also something that I recognized to a certain extent in some of the work. But I think that it was very liberating, and it was liberated from having to explain itself and having to constantly contextualize itself. And I just wanted to ask Adela how she masterfully managed that.
Thank you very much for the kind words, Shubigi. Yeah, it's quite a long process, and the way how we came here. And Lumturi Bloshmi was born 1944. I only met her in 2016, although I knew her before as an artist, and many of us knew her. She was a quite present personality and artist in the Albanian context. But her work remained always peripheric due to different reasons that we don't have to explain now here, why so many female artists have not played important roles in local and international histories. And due to some other facts like limitations, death from the age of 5, politically persecuted, and of course, being under a socialist communist regime for almost 50 years. But so she herself had this very strong character, history, and personality that affected her existence and her being, because, you know, we don't choose as people where we are born, but somehow this context, this influence us. At the same time, she, as many others, has chosen to be an artist and to express herself through art. And although her biography and history was always a very important, especially her personal history with all these troubles and limitations, has affected her way of living and doing art. At her core, her only true belief was art itself, you know, just this creative force that she felt in herself, and the necessity to express, especially for someone who could not hear and could not express through language. Art became a tool to express everything else. So although all of us who knew her and the visitors of the pavilion will get the necessary information about who her persona was, what was the context from which she came, where she grew up, and where she developed. The center of the pavilion is the work itself, which actually was always for her a tool to overcome those specificities, those limitations, and to try to bring out an essence from that complex experience that she had. And I mean, it is for all of us a great pleasure to see Albania for the first time after participating in the Venice Biennale since 1999, to be represented by a female artist. And I'm very happy to be the first female Albanian curator. And of course, she has, we all, at least me especially, because taking in consideration that Lumturi Bloshme passed away in 2020 due to COVID complications, which brings another mark to her own history and development. And we sometimes forget what COVID did as well, in the sense of how it changed or influenced the art world, because many artists got lost because of this. So it was my responsibility afterwards to create this presentation, and I mean, to be able to navigate it from different perspectives. At the center of it, to present the work of Lumturi without limiting her, but at the same time being able to tell all these different narratives that kind of float in her work and through her representation. Because as you said, when you are the first female artist or representing a minority, you are not only talking for yourself, even if you don't want to. So it was important for me to always have this kind of balance between what an artist, what a pavilion, what a specific presentation at this point in time brings with, and what actually delegates to the future. Because the pavilion is called Lumturi Bloshme, from scratch, and it was an attempt to kind of create the idea that there is always a new beginning, there is always a now, and from here we can try to look forward. And there are certain things that we can bring forward, and it's beautiful enough that art actually is a vessel and has this capacity to create reality, to capture reality, and to transport it. So I don't know, maybe now my response was very loose, but it was a sort of navigation between the attempt to show those really concentrated artworks that Lumturi herself put so much energy and so much intention in creating, and at the same time build this context that could tell a little bit about her story and about the specific context of Albania, because we have this different history behind us, you know, being under communist regime, with art being socialist realism. We didn't experience modernism. So we have here an example of an artist who, for particular reasons, has a unique itinerary of developments. And it is sometimes even difficult or limiting to try to put her into discourses, or like even using certain languages and definitions that are created in the centers of representation to explain her. So I don't know, the pavilion itself takes as well in consideration the fact that Lumturi did not hear. So even the usage of language is very limited, although it always hides in the different elements, but creates this sort of absence of a layer of knowledge and information that sometimes language can impose on us, and with it certain existing problematics. So in a way, it's a very intuitive way in which she created her work. And at the same time, I tried to maintain that intuitiveness in creating the pavilion and in curating. And that always plays an important role in my curatorial practice, although I don't limit myself of getting the necessary information, knowledge, and history, but to keep a particular open space within myself for what can be described as intuition, something that remains always open, untouchable, undescribable, but that is very related to the feeling of being in a place and the way how we take and give information. I think this has been the guidance for my work. And to me, it was important that the public gets to know her in all her dimensions. And I'm really, really very happy because we have had a great response from the public, who kind of step by step in the exhibition itself discovers this person. And the way how she related to everything was through herself, through her personal point of view. So the best thing that I could do as a curator is to create this possibility for each person visiting the exhibition to relate to her work and to the personality or the persona of Lumturi.
Thank you so much. Sorry, I know I'm not supposed to speak now, but I can't bear it. Actually, I thought your answer was also like her practice, like Roshni's practice. It's sprawling and it's epic, but it is its own history. It's not. And I love what you said about you can access knowledge as it came out from Euro-American centers of art and discourse, but it doesn't mean that they are yours, that to apply here. And I really love the fact, this is one of the things that I really love. When I said liberated, this is what I meant. It's freed from that discourse and that burden of art history as well. So thank you.
Yeah, and I just wanted to say that it was important as well for me and for the presentation to be liberated as well from that pressure that the fact of representing the country and being for the first time in such a big event as the Venice Biennale, with all the ideas of what will think who and whatever, like, and I think it's the context itself, I don't know how it is for you, that does not allow that to you. You are so concentrated in doing your work that sometimes you don't even think, but somehow, somewhere in the periphery, there is this idea that you will face a bigger public. Of the public, I was very aware of that because it was important to talk to every person, but not so much of the art historical or, let's say, art critical point of view. Yes. Okay, so I would use now the chance to ask Natalie, and actually it has been a great experience because Albania and New Zealand share the same space. Our pavilions are facing each other, and I think it has been very interesting to go through this process that has not been easy, but we always managed to find a way to work together and coexist. And this is a great example of how actually exhibitions are an example for coexistence, because they often bring different reality, different artworks, different artists together. And I think in this year's Biennale, we are the only common space with two pavilions. And sometimes I've had different reactions from the public, but I was like, hey, these are our neighbors. Sometimes you cannot choose your neighbors, you can only choose to work with them. So it has been a great pleasure that we have been working together. And it is interesting as well that there are common things in our works, no, in the background, although maybe the aesthetics, it's different. But in both our cases, we are coming with, as I talked about Luturi, with realities that are bigger than ourselves, or bigger than the reality that the artist as a name or a persona brings, especially in the work of Yuki, who gives this platform to a specific or another group of people, and creates the platform for different voices to be visible and to meet the public. And of course, Albania, it's very near to Venice and very near to Italy and very near to Europe. But the context from which Yuki and Natalie and this pavilion comes, it has a certain distance to us. So I wanted to know, Natalie, how did you manage to navigate in terms of curatorial process, but as well, accommodating the artistic work that deals with these different realities, with a very specific reality related to the Samoan people, or even within the Samoan reality, within a specific group of people, then the context of New Zealand. And of course, you are coming to Venice Biennale to meet the international and universal dimension. So how was it to navigate these realities and to find the right way to proceed and to exhibit?
Well, thank you, Adela, for your very thoughtful question for coexisting with us. One of the reasons why Yuki and I selected the Arsenale was so that we could be side by side and presenting in tandem with other pavilions through that long corridor. But I thought I'd briefly outline how we were appointed, because each pavilion has a different methodology. So Creative New Zealand, who is the national arts funding agency for New Zealand, put out an open call in around May 2019, which is about 2 years prior to what was going to be the Venice Biennale, but of course it was delayed. And New Zealand is one of the first countries to put out their open call. I think partly because they don't have a permanent pavilion, and they've been participating since 2001. So I saw the open call, and with some trepidation and enthusiasm, I reached out to Yuki. I had never worked with Yuki previously, but I certainly knew her practice. I was aware that Yuki had a solo acquisitive exhibition at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in 2008 called Living Photographs. I was aware she had participated in a number of biennales in Honolulu, Sakahan, Bangkok, and I had seen her work in the Asia Pacific Triennale in Brisbane, and we had had one dinner in Melbourne together. So I reached out to Yuki via social media and some of you will know the story. There was some apprehension, but with persistence, Yuki agreed to partner with me and we prepared our proposal. It was an incredibly detailed proposal. It took 5 weeks full time to put the proposal together. We had to do a full freight consignment and customs clearance into Venice, a global distribution plan for our publication, a full contents list, and it goes on. So 17 groups were shortlisted and we were unanimously selected. And from there we went to Venice and started doing a site visit in order to select our pavilion. And fortunately we are alongside you, Adela. And there were times when during install where we had to navigate issues of sound. Our pavilions have some commonalities, but they have quite different tenors. And I know we've tried to be sensitive to each other and find ways to coexist, which I think we've definitely done in the optimum way. So to answer your question, I guess for me, I think that while Yuki is representing her community, she's also looking at issues of intersectionality, decolonisation, environmental crises, and small island ecology. So these issues kind of sit side by side in her practice. And what was a gift for me is that when I reached out to Yuki, she already had a fully conceived concept that she had been developing for over 5 years, and it was fully thought through, so kind of conceptually. And so I could contribute, but really it was very much based on Yuki's encounter with the paintings of Paul Gauguin and wishing to upcycle and repurpose select paintings that resembled landscapes in Samoa with members of Yuki's community, the Fa'afafine community. So this concept was already fully formed, and we had to build all the, I guess, the scaffolding around it in order to realise it, as well as resource it more fully. I think that Yuki's pavilion has really resonated in this current Venice Biennale because she is bringing voices from the Pacific and telling stories that perhaps haven't been told in the Venice Biennale context. Stories of colonisation, of triumph, of acting out, acting up, being influenced by the beauty pageants, the Fa'afafine beauty pageants. We try to present a pavilion that is very theatrical and dazzling because we're half a pavilion. We use wallpaper and try to use as many Samoan reference as possible. So all our fonts and our design, which you see behind me, is based on a Samoan typographer called Joseph Churchwood, who was based in New Zealand, and we used his typography and also the Samoan bark cloth, the siapo pattern. So I guess we tried to use the specificity of Samoa and the cultural conditions there to tell broader stories and narratives of dispossession, oppression, but also triumph and humour. I think humour is really important in Yuki's practice, the kind of biting and cutting humour that you see in the video in First Impressions. So hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah.
I feel like Yuki should chime in.
I just wanted to mention humor, actually, because that's like one of the approaches that, I don't know if it was a choice or it's by nature, that I think it's stands out in the pavilion of Yuki, and it's humor as well in the works of Lumturi Bloshmi. So I think sometimes it's one of the approaches, to deal with sometimes difficult and sad and limiting histories. So yeah, I really appreciate that it's a very welcoming pavilion for a lot of visitors, and through humor, it allows them to enter into some topics that are pretty serious and need our attention.
Absolutely. I
Thank
think
you.
humor is also used kind of as a weapon to kind of flip the script and reverse some of these dominant narratives. So thank you, Adela. And now I'd like to turn to Joanna and your very special Polish pavilion that many of us have visited a number of times with the first Polish Romani artist, Małgorzata. And she's both an artist and an activist, and the title of your pavilion is Re-Enchanting the World. I was struck by the way that you use the exterior and the interior, and it's densely inlaid with fabric, stories, a zodiac cycle of life and death, very kind of legible sort of vignettes and narratives. There are women meeting, drinking coffee, gathering potatoes. But I wonder if you could talk about whether you see the work as a new narrative of storytelling, and if you could take us through some of these sort of iconographic cycles and the idea of storytelling in Małgorzata's practice.
Thank you, Natalie. Yes, so it's true that we not only use the interior of the pavilion, but also its exterior, and we kind of dressed this very cold building from 1930s, from Mussolini era, actually. And we dressed it with the tarot, the representation of the oldest tarot deck card, the Wheel of Fortune, which brings me to this narration idea, because tarot first was just a normal game at the courts in Italy. And with the arrival of Roma people to Europe in the 15th, 16th century, it started to be used as a way of storytelling and actually reading each other, reading a person, right? It was, as Ethel Brooks, one of the scholars that is writing for our catalog, says, it was a psychoanalysis before psychoanalysis. And it's one of the contribution also of the Roma community to the European community, to this ability of responding to the need to read each other and to tell stories and, you know, tease some kind of narrations. And this is very much how Małgorzata operates. She is using fabrics to soften, to re-enchant, to dehomogenize, you know, to put elements that do not fit. That's her strength. You know, so many elements you could say normatively don't fit, dots and arrows or flowers, or and yet she creates an amazing amalgamate of various patterns, social patterns, historical patterns, you know, cultural patterns, love patterns, and builds up this amazing textile palazzo inside.
Can you share with us how you were appointed as curator and artist?
So in Poland, since about 20 years, it's a very democratic process. Every professional can apply. Actually, curators apply with a concept, with an artist proposal. And what makes it even more democratic is that your names as curators are hidden. So it's only known who are the artists and the project you propose. Also because the milieu is quite small, so actually it's pretty healthy. And then later you can read all the submitted proposal on the website. So it's maybe it's from the end of the 90s. It's kind of the era of like trying to open up and be transparent as possible. I hope it will continue also under current regime. Anyhow, so Wojciech Szymański and me, we applied with Małgorzata, and our hidden, because you present like a hidden name. So our hidden name was Bacht, which means in Romani language, luck. And it brought us luck. So we won this proposal only in October last year, so it was within 5 months, like day and night, that Małgorzata and 3 collaborators from her community prepared this whole palazzo from scratch and with tons and tons of secondhand fabric, because all this is where the secondhand fabrics and those fabrics, what is also interesting in the materiality of the pavilion, they come very often from India and Bangladesh. So they also have the afterlife. It's afterlife of stories, because we have this reference to Warburg and the idea of afterlife, life after life of images, but it's also life after life of fabrics, materials from secondhand that some people wore or produced somewhere. Then it went maybe to Western Europe. It was worn in the UK, that it landed up in secondhand in Eastern Europe. So every single bits and pieces of this contains so many layers, of various stories and narrations. Yes, so now the cycle is closing and we come back to Yuki and your wonderful contribution to New Zealand. And I would like to ask, you have used this term or introduced with the pavilion the term varchive, right? Can you tell us a little bit, what is it?
Thank you, Joanna. So in Samoa, we have this word called va. So it's V-A with the macron on the A. Samoan writer Albert Wendt describes va as a space between that negotiates the binary. And then so what I did in the presentation of my archive is to add the concept of va into the archive and then call it varchive. And then so typically when we think about the archive, it's institutional and it's hidden somewhere in the storage unit that is categorized in a certain way, that are systematically categorized in certain ways. And then so in order to help build the narrative for the Paradise Camp, I deployed this idea of the varchive, where I sourced my varchive from a variety of different places, not just from institutional archives, but also archives from my own personal memorabilia, from popular culture, in order to bring the conversation forward and to also draw a line, a linear line, where time and spaces collapses. So when you look at the presentation of my archive, it spans from things from the from the 19th century right up to today. And I kind of feel like the concept of va from my Samoan perspective is something that I can see in all of the members of the first Solidarity Network, where you're trying to create space within a space that never existed before. Because for me, that's what va is to create a space between these binary, impositions that never created spaces for us. And then so when I look at Margosata's work, and based on the idea of enchantment and the postcards, I see kind of like a historical revisionism, but at the same time, I also feel like it's also questioning what is the future, just like what tarot cards are doing. And then, when I see Margosata, portraying things that are happening within her community is exactly what I'm doing, with telling the stories that are happening in my community. And I think we're all doing that in different ways. And then so with keeping in mind about the future, how are we going to create the va in the future? Like, what is the next step for all of us? After we created this space that never existed, where do we go from here? So I just wanted to kind of get a quick round of responses, brief notes. Maybe I'll start with the person right next to me, Shubigi.
I think what you said is really brilliant, and I love your idea of the va and the archive, because I think this is what we've all eventually tried to do. And I think it's so telling that this first Solidarity Network is not just a network of us, important though that is that each and every one of us also have very clearly define that space, I think. And I think that a lot of us have also mentioned this desire to see what comes after, and that it doesn't just become a one-off. I think the impulse to carve space really quickly comes from, it's not necessary to be heard. It's just necessary that the people that you come from and the people with whom you have kinship, it may not necessarily be your community or gender, any of those things, but people who you have kinship with should be able to hear themselves echoed and see themselves mirrored somewhere. So it's actually not just about ourselves as individuals. So if you're able to make that space, you're making it so that other people can see themselves reflected in it and then make their own spaces, and they feel that they have the right to do so. I think that pathway and that's the most important thing. I hope that made some sense. But thank you so much, Yuki, for this. I think after me, I think maybe Emma is to my left.
The New Zealand Pavilion's a real joy, and the space created within that, and the different worlds and insights that it opened up, certainly for me, and I'm sure others as well. It's really welcome. And the concept of VAR, the space between the binaries and what's given. One of the things that seems to have come up much in our conversation is one of narratives, and that narration, self-narration, and narration of each other, and to have that louder, to add to the complexity of the world, and a solidarity and a continued solidarity and coalition around the importance of multiple voices and multiple narratives, and that we narrate ourselves, but we also narrate each other, because that helps translate, inform, internalize each other's experience in a way that I'd very much champion pluralism in terms of being alongside each other in complex ways, rather than some of the more essentialist type narratives that can sometimes be around at the moment as regards narratives or identities, authenticity and other things. So I think the complexity of that space between, and your artwork's so layered with different forms of knowledge and information to articulate and express the ideas, I think represents the richness of what life, real life is like. So I think keeping the complexity in there as part of the continuing the VAR and multiple voices and narrations, I'd say.
Just echo what Shubigi, what you've said, and Emma, about echoing and mirroring ourselves and others, and also your point earlier on, Emma, about retaining optimism and uncertainty, so that interplay of optimism and uncertainty, and that we might form a coalition of voices and amplify each other so that we become a symphony and not a series of soloists, which is typically the Venice Biennale. So maybe we're paving the way, I don't know, but there's still a lot of work to be done to make sure that those who might speak in whispers or murmur can be heard, and that we find ways to listen to each other. I guess that's what I try and do as a curator, and I think many of us are trying to find this methodology, and maybe it's the methodology of the VAR.
The VAR is something we should stick to, and something that maybe what we have learned in the work on the Polish pavilion is that the importance of creating those pavilions in more transnational manner, because of the fact that Małgorzata comes from Roma community. I realized how many people found themselves in the pavilion, who have nothing to do with Poland. And, there were people who saw from Sweden, who saw some of Swedish hair stories represented, and the fight and activism of Swedish Romani people, or Italian, or from Balkans, So we were particularly proud that in this, not good times for Eastern Europe and the national conflicts coming back, we were able to, in this non-violent, soft manner, present a pavilion which has become transnational. And I hope this continues, because I think we all feel that, this dinosaur, which is a Venice Biennale, needs some kind of a change.
Very interesting, the VA concept. I didn't know it before, but this space in between, and most of all what Yuki said, once we created that space, what are we going to do with it? And I think this is something that I've been thinking about because of the nature of the reality in which we operate, that maybe, you know, you didn't get to use the stage for quite some time. And then once you get the chance, like, what do? Do you start complaining, criticizing why you didn't get it until now? Or do you use it for your own existence and being? And sometimes that existence and being has been limited for such a long time that you don't know what you want to do, or you don't know how you can exist without certain identities that have been projected into you, given into you. So I think art, it's very interesting because it allows you to change and to transform and to have metamorphosis as much as you want, and try to keep on changing, you know, and keep on redefining, non-identifying. At sometimes I feel we have lost this ability or capacity to do it and to fight for it. And I think this biennial was important, the curated part, but even some of the national pavilions, because it showed this transformative force and non-binary and you know, falling out of any definitions, and the right to do so, and the right of not being defined or changing definitions. So I don't know, this transformation and metamorphosis that I've learned as well from Lumturi Bloshmi, whose works are so different from each other, and who enjoys such liberty in being what she wants to be. I think this is something that we can carry on and keep on believing that it's a value.
On that note, ladies and gentlemen, and everybody in between, I would like to thank you, all our wonderful panelists, for participating in the last and final program of the Talanoa Forum. I would like to take this opportunity to thank the Tautai Contemporary Pacific Arts Trust for sponsoring this Talanoa Zoom event. And then this particular Zoom on the First Solidarity Network will be made available on YouTube on the 24th of November. And the Venice Biennale officially closes on the 27th of November. So if you're watching this YouTube Zoom, then you have a couple of more days to check out the Venice Biennale and make sure to visit the First Solidarity Network pavilions of Albania, Great Britain, Poland, Nepal, Aotearoa New Zealand, and Singapore. Okay, to Fasefua, thank you very much, everybody. And then hope to come across you and cross paths very soon. And love to you all. Thank you so much.
Paradise Camp. Paradise Camp.